Making headlines tonight. More emphasis on education, society, and culture. That's what President Park Geun-hye aims to do in appointing a deputy prime minister solely in charge of those affairs. Chinese foreign minister during a two-day visit to Seoul calls on interested parties to make efforts to revive the multilateral dialogue on North Korea's denuclearization. And a state-run think tank forecasts the Korean economy to grow 3.7% this year, maintaining its earlier growth forecast. Early edition begins now. It is 5 a.m. in New York, 4 p.m. in Bangkok, and 6 on Tuesday, the 27th of May here in Seoul. Hello, this is Early Edition at 6, live from Seoul. I'm Moon Geon-hye.
And I'm Daniel Chen. Thank you for joining us. We begin at the nation's top office, from where President Park Geun-hye established a new position, that of a second deputy prime minister.
Right, it came during a cabinet meeting where the president outlined her newly pledged government restructuring. Now, she said the prime minister would be in charge of law and order, public service reforms, and rooting out corruption. While one of the two deputy prime ministers will maintain focus on the economy, the other newly established deputy will oversee matters related to education, society, and culture, something the president says is critical in increasing efficiency and responsibility in policymaking. Now, following Tuesday's cabinet meeting, the presidential office said the nation's education minister would take on the new role. In light of last month's Seoul affair disaster, government plans to establish an integrated disaster and safety control tower are being accelerated. The Korean government said Tuesday that the project will be launched earlier than first thought and will be completed by 2017. The Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning will take control of the technical system and will verify whether it's up to the task by the end of July. A pilot project for the control tower is expected to be launched in some parts of the country next year. Now, on the local elections front, which is just a little over a week away, the nation's ruling party is facing an uphill battle in the face of public anger over the government's poor handling of last month's ferry disaster. Opposition candidates are in the lead in 6 key races, even in one area where the ruling party usually enjoys strong support. Our political correspondent Kim Young-gil paints us a clearer picture.
Candidates of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, or NPAD, and independent candidates are still out in front of their Saenuri party rivals in 6 of 7 key battlegrounds in the June 4th local elections. That includes the races for mayor in the cities of Seoul and Incheon and for governor in the Gangwon-do and Chungcheongbuk-do provinces. An opinion poll conducted by Matrix has the incumbent mayor of Seoul, Park Won-soon, with a comfortable lead over his conservative rival, Chung Mong-jun. While in the race for Gyeonggi-do governor, the opposition candidate Kim Jin-pyo has made up ground against the ruling party's Nam Kyung-pil and now leads by 0.2 percentage points. The most surprising turn of events may just come from Busan. The ruling party has held a firm grip on the position of mayor in the southern port city for decades, but the recent polls show independent candidate Oh Go-don with a comfortable lead over the Saenuri party candidate. With just over a week until election day, the ruling party candidate is in the lead in just one of the 7 key races, that being for mayor of the administrative city of Sejong, where Saenuri candidate Yoo Han-sik is up against his NPAD rival. Korea's local election results are considered a barometer of public sentiment for the ruling party and the government, which has borne the brunt of criticism in recent weeks over its handling of the April ferry disaster that left more than 300 people dead. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Now, in the wake of the ferry disaster, many Koreans have opted to stay in and tone down their activities, and that has caused consumer sentiment in this country to plunge to an 8-month low in the month of May. The Bank of Korea says its consumer sentiment index in May fell to 105 from 108 in April, marking the lowest level since a reading of 102 seen in September last year. Now, the index is a barometer of consumers' overall economic outlook, and a reading above 100 means consumers who expect economic and living conditions to improve in the coming months outnumber those who expect them to worsen. Reflecting the sedate and cautious mood, Koreans spent less on travel and entertainment this month, while medical spendings edged up. Readings in current living conditions and future spending also shed 2 points compared to a month earlier.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gon-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
The level of Korea's household debt has risen yet again to another record high. The Bank of Korea said Tuesday that the total amount of debt hanging over households amounted to $1 trillion as of the end of March. That's up $3.3 billion from 3 months earlier. The bank, however, noted that the rate of growth has slowed from the $27 billion increase recorded over the fourth quarter of last year. It attributed the slowdown in debt to a seasonal slowdown in mortgage loans and year-end bonuses. Now, with Korea's economy recovering at a sluggish pace, Korea's state-run economic policy think tank has lowered its economic outlook for this year. As our Kwon So-ah reports, last month's ferry disaster played a role in the downward revision.
The Korea Development Institute has adjusted Korea's economic growth outlook for this year down to 3.7%. It's the same 3.7% forecast made in its previous report in November, but according to an adjustment in the way they calculate GDP, Tuesday's forecast represents a drop of 0.2 percentage points. What affected the lower growth expectation most was a drop in private consumption, as the KDI adjusted the growth rate in the sector from an earlier 3.6% to 2.7%. This comes as consumers have been spending less since the Seoul ferry disaster last month that killed around 300 people. The KDI expects the negative effect on consumption to continue on in the second half of the year. Tuesday's report also forecasts a rather slow rise in consumer prices for this year and next. The current account surplus is predicted to be roughly $78 billion for this year, similar to last, but says in 2015 the figure will drop to around $65 billion due to improvements in the domestic market and a stronger won. The KDI's expectations are fairly low compared to other institutions. The government expects this year's growth at 4.1%. The central bank and the OECD has it at 4%. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
A prominent trend in the Korean society these days is that more Korean women in their 30s continue on with their careers. Fresh data shows their presence in the workforce reached a record high last year. While this is a positive development in a traditionally patriarchal country like Korea, it comes with other consequences. Our Shin Se-min reports.
More Korean women are jumping in the workforce. The labor participation rate of women in their 30s hit its highest rate on record last year, albeit with minor growth. According to Statistics Korea, the percentage of women between the ages of 30 and 39 with jobs was 57% in 2013. The numbers in the age bracket have been growing, but only by about 1 percentage point each year since 2009, with the exception of 2008 when the global financial crisis hit. Experts mainly attribute the growth of women in the workforce to more women receiving higher education and putting off marriage. While the labor participation rate has been on a steady rise, Korea still lags far behind when compared to other countries.
Among the OECD nations, Korea is one of the countries on the bottom of the list when it comes to the female labor participation rate. For instance, in 2012, the OECD average was in the low 70% range, while Korea was in the 50% range.
And while government measures such as encouraging companies to provide more flexible working hours for women have helped raise the participation rate of Korean women, Kang added that the private sector needed to do more. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Moving on to a different story now, a bill which recently passed the U.S. lower house has ordered the Pentagon to examine ways of strengthening missile defense cooperation among Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel will have to report back to the Armed Services Committee no later than 6 months after the bill goes into effect. Our Kim Hyun-bin has this report.
The U.S. National Defense Authorization Act for the year 2015 passed the House of Representatives last week. It stipulates that the Secretary of Defense should assess and identify opportunities for boosting missile defense cooperation among South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. If enacted, the Pentagon will evaluate whether the three countries can share more military information, have their missile systems integrated, and conduct joint exercises. After picking up the information on Tuesday, experts in Seoul say Washington's move could face resistance, as it could anger China, and as South Korea is aiming to implement its own missile defense program, named Korea Air and Missile Defense, by early 2020. The passing of the bill comes in line with a report out of the Japanese media that U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice discussed the matter with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe last month. The Yomiuri Shimbun report said Rice suggested immediately sharing information among the three nations if South Korean radar detects a North Korean missile launch. Attention now lies on how the South Korean government will react, and if it will react to Washington's move. Experts say Seoul will benefit the least among the three, because it's already set up high-tech radar systems throughout the nation because of the North Korea threat. Expect the issue to be discussed later this week, when the defense ministers of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan meet on the sidelines of the Asia Security Summit, Shangri-La Dialogue, in Singapore. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Now, Facebook bought WhatsApp for as much as $19 billion. Rakuten took over Viber for $900 million earlier this year. Now, in yet another major development in the global chat app wars, Korea's largest mobile messenger service, KakaoTalk, and the nation's #2 internet portal company, Daum Communications, have announced their plans to merge through an equity swap.
This will be the largest merger involving internet-based companies in Korea and could pose a threat to the nation's biggest search engine, Naver. So is this a win-win deal for both companies, and will the creation of this $3.3 billion Daum Kakao deal reshape Korea's mobile internet landscape? Well, we have Dr. Moon Song-chun live in the studio for some analysis. Dr. Moon is a professor of business management at Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, or KAIST. Professor, it's great to have you back.
Hello.
Now, this Daum Kakao merger, it's a deal that we need to understand from the inside as well as the outside. Let's first go over the circumstances that these two companies found themselves in leading up to this merger.
Yes, this is a kind of desperate and inevitable choice for both companies to have a merger, since both companies recorded a loss in profit for the 3 consecutive years in a row. So I think they need some change to show that show to their customer that they are still healthy and strong. So we will see what happens, in a year or two.
Well, it takes more than 2 number 2s to beat the greatest, but we'll have to wait and see. How does the Daum Kakao deal change the landscape of Korea's IT sector and, of course, the mobile phone industry, in your opinion?
The Naver is a de facto monopoly, and it is very strong in terms of the internet portal. Daum is not in any way not comparable to Naver. So the Daum is in a position. Maybe the simply collapsed, or maybe resurging, by kind of changing their tactics or strategy. For example, they can use the KakaoTalk as a leverage to advance to another, the market, which is, I think, the telecommunication service provider market. And then the SK Telecom and KT and LGU Plus will kind of feel some kind of the threat or kind of the discomfort, because we in Korea are waiting for first telecom service provider for the past 5 years, and we haven't seen anything like this kind of the potential merger, and we'll see what happens. And the Korean government is very interested in finding some potential telecom service provider at this time.
Right, that's one point that I haven't heard before, so very interesting point there. Now, the companies will definitely create some kind of a synergy effect as by converging their services like Kakao's mobile platform and Daum's service and contents, of course, but what would be the determining factor in guaranteeing a success?
They should demonstrate any sign of profit in a year or two. Otherwise, the customer will turn away, and they will not be interested in investing to Daum anymore. So they need to find out some new, very challengeable market, which is maybe not in the business of their style, They need to change maybe some strategy to move another sector of IT industry to show that they are still strong and they still have some potential energy to make the IT industry healthy and profitable.
What about their overseas businesses? Apparently, the two CEOs did not say much about their business plans overseas. Either they have a solid plan or it's a very open book.
As you know, we haven't seen any global presence of Korean internet portal, even though Naver has some, but that's very small. And when you compare to Google, Google is a behemoth, and it is very strong in the rest of the world, other than Korea and China and Russia. So the even Naver should show their presence globally. Otherwise, the Naver is a domestic player, and maybe someday when the Google is strong, will be strong in terms of Korean language services, then Naver will be in a very bad position. So Naver should be awareing that kind of situation.
Right. Well, it definitely should be interesting to watch, how this Daum Kakao merger unfolds and how successful or not it is. And I'm sure that it will be the front runner of a new chapter in this IT industry. All right, Dr. Moon Song-chun, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight.
Thanks, Cindy.
Now, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi called for efforts to revive dialogue to deal with North Korea's nuclear program. He was speaking at the Chinese embassy in Seoul Tuesday during his two-day visit to Korea. There, he emphasized the need for collective or combined efforts by neighboring countries to restart the six-party denuclearization talks. He added that China will contribute efforts to improving South-North Korea relations, saying that peace and stability on the Korean peninsula serves its fundamental interest. However, despite diplomatic efforts to jumpstart that long-stalled six-party talks, North Korea may not be willing to negotiate with its nuclear program under any kind of circumstances. Our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee sat down with Victor Cha. He is a North-South Korea expert from the U.S. for his views on the prospects of the six-party talks.
Bringing back North Korea to the negotiating table could take some time. In an interview with Arirang News on Tuesday, Victor Cha, Korea chair for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, said the United States has shown some flexibility, but that its offer remains unanswered.
But I think what the United States is saying is that, look, if you show you're willing to stop testing, and allow inspectors back in and allow for negotiations over your second nuclear program, then the U.S. is willing to come back to negotiations. It's a sign of flexibility on the part of the United States to keep the negotiations alive. But the North Koreans don't seem to be interested in that right now.
While some view the so-called six-party talks as an old formula, the visiting expert said the multilateral framework is still a valid way to denuclearize Pyongyang. The six-party talks involving the two Koreas, the United States, China, Japan, and Russia, broke down in December 2008.
The U.S.-North Korea bilateral is important because North Korea wants to talk to the United States. But the six-party format is also important because it ensures that whatever agreements are made between the U.S. and North Korea are reaffirmed in a six-party context to ensure that, in particular, the North Koreans comply with the agreement.
Dr. Cha says China could take a stronger role by linking North Korea's economic aid to its denuclearization, but that it's not ready to take that risk.
If they cut off things too severely, they could collapse the regime. And right now, at least their calculation is that that is not worth the risk, even though it means a slowly developing nuclear program.
And the remaining five parties have problems of their own. For instance, South Korea and Japan are at odds over historical issues. Dr. Cha says the friction will affect the ability to coordinate effectively on North Korea, which is why the two neighbors both need to take action.
I certainly think that Japan should issue an apology for the comfort women. But if the Japanese issue an apology, I think the South Koreans have to be ready to accept an apology.
Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Korea's main gateway, Incheon International Airport, has ranked the world's best airport for nearly a decade now.
Right, but it's falling short in one area. Its goal of becoming a so-called hub airport. Fewer international travelers are passing through Incheon on their way to other stops. Our Connie Kim has the details.
There are concerns Incheon International Airport may lose its reputation as a regional aviation hub. The number of passengers making international transfers at Korea's largest airport has been on the decline in recent months. In April, 525,000 people stopped over in Korea on their way to other destinations, a significant drop from just 8 months earlier. It's a disconcerting trend for an airport like Incheon that aspires to be a so-called hub airport. Compared to others that boast that title like Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, Germany's Frankfurt Airport, and Singapore Changi Airport, Incheon lags far behind with a transfer rate at 17% this year, placing it outside the global top 10. The Korean daily Joseonilbo attributes the decline to fewer Japanese and Chinese passengers passing through the airport. Experts say Incheon International Airport needs to increase the supply of international flight transfers in order to increase its transfer passengers.
Hong Kong and Singapore have risen as hub airports because of convenient business travel schedules and low air freight charges. Korea needs to actively bring in more diverse airlines from abroad to increase supply to passengers.
Lee also added that establishing tourist attractions would also help. Although Incheon International Airport has topped the airport service quality assessment for 9 consecutive years, it has a number of hurdles to scale before it can call itself one of the world's hub airports. Connie Kim, Arirang News, Incheon.
Well, a new super jumbo plane will soon call Korea home. Korea's Asiana Airlines celebrated the acquisition of its first A380 plane on this Tuesday. It will make its first appearance at Incheon International this Friday and begin commercial flights from June 13th.
The Airbus, which can hold nearly 500 passengers, will initially offer daily flights to Tokyo and Hong Kong. Then in August, Asiana will begin using a second A380 that will take passengers longer distances.
Well, as for the weather conditions, it's definitely not very pleasant because we continue to get plagued by high levels of fine dust and unseasonably warm temperatures. So let's get a check of the forecast by turning to our Michelle Park. Michelle.
Good evening, guys. And the level of fine dust, like you said, has been a definite nuisance and will continue to be one tomorrow. Now, on top of that, an ozone warning was issued a few hours ago for Gyeonggi-do province.
Well, despite the pollutions, Michelle, how are the weather conditions looking tomorrow?
Well, we can expect partly cloudy skies in the mornings, which will make for a sunny day later on. However, those in Daegu can expect gray skies with sporadic showers in the afternoon. Now, the highest temperatures will continue tomorrow with the highs mostly in the high 20s, but do keep that in mind. Temperatures are on the chilly side in the mornings and nights. Now, going over to our temperature readings, so we'll start off the morning at 17 before reaching up to 28 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will peak up to 28 and 24 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 26, Dokdo at 23, while Gyeongbuk tops out at 16. Well, that's all I have at this moment. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
Thanks for that, Michelle. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching, and for our viewers in Korea, have a wonderful rest of the evening. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Moon Ganyang to those of you in other parts of the world. Have a great start to your day, and we hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.